now done well over $50 billion.
That's Mike Cagney. His startup Figure is worth over $8 billion, but you might know him better from the last unicorn he started, SoFi. After helping save $1.8 billion on student loans, he left his company with a new chip on his shoulder to build something even bigger.
I jumped in about 2 months afterwards. I felt to some degree there was something I needed to prove.
And 8 years later, he returned with his second IPO. But let's rewind. Mike wasn't always a Silicon Valley insider.
I started in financial services in the late 90s. I was working at Wells Fargo and building out their derivatives business and ran their proprietary trading and structured product groups there.
But he realized that most of the financial industry was just one big middleman.
A lot of people don't understand when you swipe a debit card, there's actually 5 parties that sit in between you and the merchant that touch that transaction before it goes through.
And these middlemen silently profit in the background and slow down transactions, which didn't sit well with Mike.
I was interested in alternatives to finance. And one of the things that intrigued around this was the idea of, boy, if you could just directly connect the sources and uses of capital, you could build a much more efficient ecosystem.
So in 2000, he built a wealth management software company called Finaplex and raised over $50 million across multiple venture rounds, getting investors like Menlo Ventures on board. The company survived the dot-com crash and 7 years later had a successful exit.
After that, started a hedge fund. Initially, that fund, I had a whole bunch of limited partners and investors, and then I consolidated that down to just myself and a couple of big family offices.
But before long, he got the itch to build something from scratch again.
In 2010, I'm staring at a Bloomberg screen, watching it blink, thinking, is this my life? You know, I felt like I lost an IQ point every time it would blink at me.
His friends thought he was crazy. Why pursue another high-risk business when you've already had success? But for Mike, he felt compelled to get back in the weeds of early-stage building.
0 to 1 to me is the most exciting time. And because 0 to 1, everyone does everything. There is no your job, my job. It's, our collective job is to get this company to 1, where then we can get it to many. I started thinking a lot about starting a company again. And I said, well, how am I going to do this? Because I'm not integrated into the Silicon Valley scene, right? I'm not, at that time, I hadn't gone to Stanford. I had done one startup before, so I had some venture relationships, but not a huge amount of venture relationships.
Before worrying about raising money, though, Mike needed to find a problem to solve and people to solve it with.
There was a fellowship program at Stanford's Graduate School of Business called the Sloan Fellow, where you go down for 12 months. And it's not an executive MBA. It's actually a true immersive full-time, 12-month fellowship. And I thought, well, if I go there, I could probably use that to leverage the network.
While at Stanford, Mike met his 3 co-founders, Dan Macklin, James Finnegan, and Ian Brady. And as they brainstormed ideas, Mike turned their attention back to what he knew best: banking.
I was looking at the bank and the bank taking depositor money and then using that money to lend it out and just thinking about, boy, if you could just directly connect the sources and uses of capital, you could build a much more efficient ecosystem.
Mike had realized that the same idea of removing intermediaries from transactions that had led him to found Finaplex could be applied to other markets as well. Specifically, a market that Mike was around at Stanford every single day: student loans. Mike thought he might be onto something big, so he reached out to his friend Chris Larson for his take. Chris, who later went on to co-found Ripple, had previously co-founded a company called Prosper that was based on this same principle of directly connecting the sources and uses of capital that Mike was bullish on. Mike figured this new idea would be right up his alley.
And I'm like, Chris, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? He's like, it's a horrible idea. Student loans is a horrible asset class. It's not going to work. You should never do this. And I was like, oh, man. So I think I'm going to try it anyway.
Despite his respect for Chris's opinion, Mike was determined. He felt this could be a case where he was contrarian and right.
My view was, look, student lending is an incredible backdrop for connecting sources and uses of capital. So you should be able to get alumni from the school who have an affinity, a relationship, who want to support the students of that school.
So after graduating, he and his co-founders launched SoFi, and it took off instantly, with over 100 students receiving $2 million in loans from 40 Stanford alumni.
The demand for the loan far outstripped the supply of capital. And so more people wanted the credit than we could, than the speed at which we could get the alumni to put money up.
Unable to keep up with demand, they had to find ways to bring more capital into the market faster than alumni were willing or able to.
Very quickly, because it outstripped the supply of capital, the idea of connecting sources and uses started to fade away, and we went to the wholesale capital markets. And that's the other thing I always tell entrepreneurs. I'm like, you have no idea what that path's going to be. It's good to have a North Star to be working towards. You also shouldn't be so dogmatic that that's the only North Star.
Over the next 2 years, SoFi brought in over $500 million from institutional capital partners like Morgan Stanley to help students at over 100 universities. And they were able to offer best-in-class loan refinancing rates because their customers tended to be Henrys who, despite being burdened with high student loan debt, had strong future earning potential. As the flywheel between lenders and recipients started turning faster and faster, Mike led an expansion into mortgages and other loan refinancing products. And as his vision for a full-service financial partner came to be, SoftBank stepped in and offered him $1 billion.
I went to Masa and I was like, I don't want the billion, I want 200 million. And he said, you know, you're going to take the billion. And I'm like, but I don't want the billion, I want 200 million. He's like, oh, you don't take the billion, I'm going to invest in your competitor. And I was like, all right, I'll take the billion.
No matter the reason, having $1 billion in the bank gave Mike the ability to experiment aggressively and do anything to win the market.
It's the largest private round anyone had ever risen. It gave us a balance sheet that afforded enormous flexibility and risk-taking, and prudent risk-taking, not reckless risk-taking, that our competitors couldn't do. And it just gave us the ability to lean in and use that balance sheet as a weapon, and it was extremely effective.
But after 2 years of aggressive expansion, and as the company was preparing to file a formal bank charter, things changed. In the shadow of Travis Kalanick's ouster at Uber by investors in June 2017, SoFi came under attack from emboldened smear merchants at legacy media brands. Mike eventually chose to resign to instead get his focus back on building at the 0-1 stage of something new.
I started thinking a lot about how do I get back to this core thesis of connecting sources and uses of capital. I started really thinking a lot about blockchain and about the virtues of decentralization. And that's where I had sort of my aha moment, my epiphany on it. You can create a native digital asset where I know for certain its ownership, its composition, its history. It introduces transactional efficiencies, it introduces liquidity opportunity, and it introduces financing constructs that aren't available in traditional financial markets. And notably, it takes away trust and it replaces it with truth. And the financial markets are really fundamentally premised around this concept of there needs to be trust. Trust can't be had, so there's intermediation. Blockchain, to me, had the ability to distill things down to bilateral transactions. And that would disintermediate huge amounts of rent-seeking infrastructure that translates to trillions of dollars of capital, of market capitalization.
Replacing trust with truth was the disruptive market force to replace middlemen that Mike had been looking for his entire career. But this time, Mike wanted to do things differently. He co-founded Figure in 2018 alongside his wife and spent the first 3 months defining the company's culture before worrying about launching a product.
I view everything in the context of externalities and internal points. You want things that you can control, right? Externalities are not things you can control. And so there were a lot of things we learned about that in terms of decisions you have to make early on that have massive ramifications downstream. You need to find what it is that is genuine to you. And then when you hire people, that has to be the first criteria. Right? Am I hiring someone that has these same beliefs?
With the culture set to scale alongside the business, Mike found their initial wedge.
In 2018, I said I need a tangible use case to bring to the financial ecosystem to use blockchain. And I felt that was securitization. And I felt that we could originate, aggregate, securitize loans on blockchain and save almost 1% of cost, right? In what's usually a 6% gross margin business. And so I went to a bunch of banks to pitch this, and universally, every bank's like, oh, Mike, this is awesome. We love it. We'd like to be the 10th bank to do this. So when you get 9 ahead of us, call us up.
And as any founder knows, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
And so, I said, all right, well, let's make this an internal thing. We started originating loans on blockchain. We're the first ones to do that. What we're doing is we're actually allowing those third parties to access capital directly rather than us intermediating with our balance sheet. Right. So now we're balance sheet light, not using our equity capital.
Despite crypto's ups and downs from 2018 through 2025, Mike led Figure to be the first to originate over $16 billion in blockchain loans from over 150 third-party originators, form partnerships with Apollo and Jefferies, and process over $50 billion in on-chain transactions. And new asset classes like auto loans, mortgages, and equities are on the horizon post-IPO. Mike wants Figure to be the blockchain version of Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, except without $20 billion going to Wall Street in fees and with 24/7 settlement for end users. In the lead up to its 2025 IPO, Figure launched Democratized Prime, a first-of-its-kind lending pool backed by home equity lines of credit. It introduced 3 features to the lending space, which made it one of the first scalable, transparent, and on-chain venues for real-world lending, and a proof of concept for how blockchain rails can open access to traditionally closed financial products. First, its auction model allows for hourly Dutch auctions to set market rates. Second, its over-collateralization protects lenders from downside risk, and its transparent settlement makes all loan performance and cash flows visible on-chain. It's safe to say that scaling is going well, and Mike's more bullish on blockchain than ever.
This technology will move more public market cap than any other technology ever has, or I think any technology ever will.
Throughout his journey, Mike has consistently worked to remove middlemen and make financial transactions simpler, easier, and better for end users.
I wanted to build a category-defining large enterprise, large business, something that was truly disruptive and truly impacted people in a positive way.
And when you think big like Mike, you have to take big swings and shoot for something truly new and different.
They try to say, I'm going to be the Uber of this, right? Or the Airbnb of this. And you're like, well, why can't you just be this? Like, why can't you build something that's category defining? And you pick an opportunity that's greenfield enough, you're going to be able to out-execute what's there. Large institutions are very vulnerable in lots of different capacities, but the biggest is they aren't run by entrepreneurs.